Our journey through the American National Parks begins in the northwest corner of Wyoming with the crown jewel of the American National Park system, Yellowstone. On a high plateau far above the boiling magma of the Earth's interior lies the largest geothermal area of the world. And the trademark of this park and the system as a whole, Old Faithful, lives up to its name with a spectacular show every 71 minutes. In the 19th century, trappers went east with stories of spouting columns of water 60 feet high, bubbling hot springs of iridescent green and gold. Their stories were regarded as lies, and it wasn't until Jim Bridger led the first U.S. expeditionary team into the region in 1859 that the American people became aware of this amazing land. Over 10,000 geothermal features can be found in the park. No other place on Earth offers such an amazing assortment of spouting geysers and bubbling hot springs. What exactly is happening here? Well, it is all an ultimate result of rain. Water seeps down into the fractured crust of the plateau until it reaches the molten lava a mile below the surface. The water boils and the weight above causes it to superheat. Finally, it explodes, rushing to the surface, turning to billowing steam as it makes its violent and furious escape. The mud volcanoes, the paint pots, and the hot springs all add to the eerie netherworld quality of this popular park. For here in Yellowstone, the geothermal features point out clearly the violent and furious activity far below the surface of this fragile planet we call home. But all of Yellowstone is not a bubbling cauldron. Nature has provided a panorama of variety here. The Grand Canyon of the Yellowstone is one of the park's most impressive features. Golden limestone, carved by time, has given the park its colorful and descriptive name. Two beautiful waterfalls add to the majesty of this canyon region. The Upper Falls sends the Yellowstone River down a short, narrow channel of about a mile. And then the river descends in a fury over the mighty, thundering Lower Falls, twice the height of Niagara, a never-ending, ceaseless example of nature's carving tools. Here on the high plateau, man is a recent arrival, a visitor as it were. And while 2.5 million people may visit this park annually, they are merely guests. Here, the animals roam the open plains. Man watches from a distance, then leaves. In Yellowstone, the land, in many respects, still belongs to the buffalo, the mountain sheep, the deer, and the elk. As visitors, we stand and watch and can easily imagine what this region must have been like long before man arrived, when giant herds of wild animals roamed the open plains and called the land their own. Of Yellowstone's many different residents, certainly the most impressive is the mighty American moose. Herds of these magnificent creatures can be seen in the Hayden Valley, and in the late afternoon, they lounge alongside the cool river as the heat of day fades with the setting sun. Yellowstone Lake, 320 feet deep at 7,000 feet elevation, is fed from snow stored in forests high above its 100-mile shoreline. But in many respects, Yellowstone is a park designed for the convenience of man, but designed so as to not interfere with the natural setting or the wilderness environment. Celebrated trout fishing is one of the many reasons for visiting this popular park. The Old Faithful Inn, the largest log hotel in the world, has beckoned visitors since 1904 to stay in either the main hotel building or the individual rustic log cabins that surround it. And if you're spending some time up this way, you might like to sample a taste of the old pioneer spirit with a ride on the stagecoach out at Tower Junction. The stagecoach is one of 10 that were built back in the 19th century to transport early sightseers across the park. And while this stagecoach ride is certainly intended as a tourist attraction today, these coaches are merely doing what they were originally built for nearly a century ago, moving tourists through Yellowstone. For the early visitors to Yellowstone, comforts were often lacking. The stagecoach ride from Old Faithful to the Tower Junction took several days. And instead of today's modern traveler, who is often plagued with traffic jams, these early visitors of the late 19th century often encountered roaming herds of wild buffalo here on the high plateau. Nearby to Tower Junction is one of the park's most impressive features, the silent, awesome, mammoth hot springs. Here in row after row of white crystalline terraces, nature has left a legacy of mineral deposits. Deposits that have created vast formations along the northern slope of the plateau. As you wander through the silent corridors, the heat of the springs rises about you, and you can smell the mineral vapors. This sculptured beauty has been in formation for millenniums of time, long before man set foot on this plateau 9,000 years ago. In 1872, President Grant signed a proclamation declaring Yellowstone to be a public pleasuring ground. It was the first American national park, the crown jewel of the system, and the purposes and ideals of today's vast national parks complex began here. And it was through the dreams of far-sighted men and women that this system of parks that we are about to explore exists unspoiled and sure of their future. From the state of Wyoming, we now move east to the state of Maine, in our first eastern national park, Acadia. In 1919, Acadia was created as a national park. It was the first east of the Mississippi River. It's small as Western standards go, only about 34,000 acres, but it's a very special place. Here, the scenery is not spectacular or even particularly unusual. Rather, it is typical of the rugged Maine coastline, where the salty surf has carved the glacial rocks into the sharp, jagged cliff formations typical of this down east region. Most of Acadia National Park is set on an island, Mount Deseret Island. But unlike the western parks, where the boundaries were generally established out of existing government-owned lands, Acadia was acquired piecemeal through donations and private purchases. The result is a crazy quilt pattern of public and private land. John D. Rockefeller contributed much of the original plot of ground and was the first person to foster the national park's idea here at Acadia. The beautiful old New England homes and churches remind us that mankind has played an important role in developing this region. But these homes possess little of the grandeur this area once knew. On the edge of the national park today is the community of Bar Harbor. Today, it's a lively fishing village serving the needs of local residents and visitors alike. But at the turn of the 20th century, this was an elegant street of New York stores. Stores that had followed their wealthy clientele to their summer mansion homes. Bar Harbor rivaled Newport as a playground for millionaires and remained as such until a disastrous fire in 1947 swept through the town, completely destroying the community, the magnificent mansion homes, and a way of life that would never be again. Today, Bar Harbor is far better known for the local catch, lobster, the greatest natural resource the state of Maine can claim. And when you don't have to ship these crustaceans cross-country, well, the price actually becomes rather affordable. Fishing is the livelihood of many of the Bar Harbor residents, clamming at low tide a common summer activity. And the lobsters themselves, how are they caught? Well, they're caught in wooden traps better known as pots. These are on shore for repair. Normally, they would lie at the bottom of the cold ocean floor for years on end. The harbor is filled with bobbing lobster boats, a special craft designed to navigate the choppy waters and allow the fisherman to efficiently check his traps. Now, the image of these fishermen is often a romanticized view of salty, weather-beaten men, stoic and self-reliant. But today's lobster man must also be practical and a good businessman as well. Gary Haber is one of 50 men in Bar Harbor who make their living fishing for lobster. And we're going to go out with him today and see just how all of this is done. Mr. Haber fishes waters that border the national park, waters that are filled with colorful bobbing floats. In the state of Maine, when a man registers for his fishing license, he registers his float colors, and the colored rings on each float indicate which traps belong to which fisherman. There is no limit to the number of traps you can set. The only limit is your energies. Each day, Mr. Haber will check 350 of his 700 traps. We left at 4 o'clock in the morning and will return to the harbor mid-afternoon. The only limit on the fishing concerns size. Each lobster must be measured from eye to tail with a rule. Those under a certain size are thrown back, as well as those over a certain size. The real giants are considered to be the breeders, and they're returned to the sea to help expand the crop. You may be curious to know just how the lobster gets himself in this predicament. Well, it isn't terribly complicated. The trap is divided into two sections, a kitchen and a parlor. A ball of bait is hung in the kitchen. The bait is dead fish. Lobsters are scavengers. Sensing a meal, the lobster will crawl into the kitchen through a net funnel. After he's had his dinner, he'll realize that he can't escape, and he'll crawl through another net funnel until he ends up in the parlor, leaving the kitchen free for another foolhardy brother. The trap is then rebaited, placed back on the ocean floor for another 2 days. If you're traveling up this way and you'd like to sample the local catch, well, you don't have to sit down to a candlelit dinner to enjoy lobster. No, you can stop at any one of the lobster shacks, sort of a seafood McDonald's, where the lobsters are cooked within hours after having been brought from the sea. This lady on the edge of Bar Harbor keeps her kettles boiling all afternoon. And for about $4, you can pick out a lobster and have it cooked in a matter of just a few minutes. Sadly, for the lobster to taste right, it must be boiled alive. Certain marine experts claim that the crustacean's nervous system is such that it never feels a thing. Personally, I doubt this, but any feelings you may have along these lines will quickly vanish when these creatures are temptingly placed in front of you. And don't start getting finicky at this point about wanting bibs and knives and forks. No, here at least at the Lobster Shack, this is considered to be finger food, and you just tear in. Although knowing how to tear in does help. Eating a lobster is a true art, and if you know how to do it, you can eat almost everything but the shell. Most people waste a great deal of a lobster, but it does take time and patience. And lobsters have virtually no calories. All the calories are in the butter. If you don't mind eating the lobster without butter, it's the perfect diet food. There's enough cholesterol to cause your arteries to contract right on the spot, but no calories, so at least you'll die thin. The lobster fishermen, Bar Harbor, it's all a part of Acadia National Park, where man and nature have learned to work together in harmony. From the state of Maine, we now move far to the west, to the state of Washington, the lofty Cascade Mountains, and the mammoth peak of Mount Rainier. Towering 14,400 feet at the Columbia Crest, this gem of the Cascade Range stands as a landmark visible for hundreds of miles in any direction. Snow-capped year-round, this mountain is the site of 41 different glaciers, active and in constant movement across the face of the peak. In this silent, snowy land, the stillness is punctuated by the creaking sounds of solid walls of ice as the glaciers move forward over the valley floors. Mount Rainier and its glaciers are actually rather recent events in the history of the world geologically. The last major glacial movement of the Ice Age, far below the present park boundaries, ended only about 10,000 years ago. Today, the glaciers of Mount Rainier are once again active and expanding at the rate of 50 to 400 feet a year. Each day, the glaciers inch forward a few feet, carrying with them hunks of the Earth's mantle, giant pieces of bedrock as they go. But in spite of the snow, the chill, the ice, and the cold, this is a volcano, dormant, peaceful, waiting for a future day. To see the cone of the volcano, we must fly over the peak. An occasional wisp of steam escapes from the volcano, reminding us that, like Mount St. Helens to the south, this too will one day, again in the future, erupt and explode in a violent fury, sending the endless sheets of ice and snow down the fiery mountainside in torrential floods. When will it happen? Maybe tomorrow, maybe a million years. No one really knows. But this soft blanket of snow only hides a furnace of violent activity deep in the volcanic core. But as the mountain waits, the years move on and the seasons change. Winter ends and spring arrives. At the lower elevations, the snows melt and quiet mountain streams suddenly overflow. In the valleys, the grass is green and the trees leaf out, here where spring and summer last only a brief period of time. Beavers busy themselves preparing their summer dams. This vandal of the forest floor is doing only what nature has taught him to do. And in the wet, low-lying areas, the yellow, lovely but pungent skunk cabbage blossom and last only a few days before being devoured by the deer. Mount Rainier is a national park of majestic beauty, and for the hearty spring and autumn visitor, it offers an experience in solitude, far removed from the busy world in which we live. From the chill of the mountains, we now move to the heat of the desert, the state of Utah, and Arches National Park. In all of my travels to make this film, I found this desolate spot of the Utah desert to be the most awesome, eerie place of all. Here, a never-ceasing desert wind provides the only sound that you will hear. And standing before you are monoliths of stone, towering hundreds of feet into the air, skyscrapers of sandstone, created by millions of years of rain and wind and time. What happened here? Well, geologists theorize that the Earth's crust buckled in a 30-mile stratified zone. The cracks slowly eroded into freestanding formations. Eventually, all of the loose material became windblown sand, and the fins stood alone. Today, the fins continue to be carved into the balanced rocks, the towers, the coves, and of course the world-famous arches. In time, these arches will fall, and in time, new ones will be created. For here time is not measured in years and centuries, but eras, ages, and eons. And as you gaze out over this hot desert plain at these geological wonders of the world, you can't help but realize that all of the years of civilized man are but a speck on the face of time that this strange and mysterious planet has known. From the state of Utah, we now move a short distance across the Colorado border to Mesa Verde. Translated, the name means green table. It is a vast plateau stretching across the southwestern corner of Colorado. And here, 2,000 years ago, the Indians built their homes, not of tent material, but of brick and stone, in the protected crevices, the cliffs of the Green Plateau. Mesa Verde is not so much a national park of nature, but more a park of early man's achievements. For these primitive people, the building of a permanent civilization was a giant step forward out of the Stone Age. They constructed their homes in protected crevices. They built granaries to store the grain for the cold winter months, and they organized their lives around a sense of community. And then, for reasons archaeologists have never been able to fully explain, they left slowly over a period of 2 centuries. And by the 13th century, they were all gone, and the cities of stone that they had built went to ruin. In the 19th century, the first white men riding the open plain on horseback laid eyes on these silent cities of stone. But they were not here for archaeological research, but rather to make fortunes. Fortunes off the newly discovered gold in the hills of Colorado. And today at Durango, near to the national park, you can relive some of those exciting days of the Colorado Gold Rush years with a ride on the Durango-Silverton route of the Denver Rio Grande. This is one of the great legendary steam train rides of America, and it's a ride you won't want to miss if you have any nostalgic feelings at all about the golden days of steam. This train operates daily between Durango and Silverton, as it has since the track was first laid in 1882. We leave at 8 o'clock in the morning. The locomotive couples onto the cars, the fireman stokes the boiler, the engineer blows the whistle, the coal smoke billows out, and off we go on one of the great train rides of America, high into the Colorado Rocky Mountains on the Durango-Silverton route of the Denver Rio Grande. This is a narrow gauge railroad. The reason the track was laid in narrow gauge was simply that a wide gauge track would not have allowed the train to make all of the necessary hairpin turns in its climb high into the Colorado Rocky Mountains. Why was the somewhat impossible route laid? Pure and simple, gold. The rush was on, and the Denver Rio Grande managed to get this entire line laid to the mining community of Silverton in only 9 months and 5 days. The crew worked through a howling blizzard in 1882 to complete the track, and in the few short years of the Colorado Gold Rush, this little line took $300 million in gold out of the hills. As you chug past the mountains and over the streams, you can't help but feel some of that sense of excitement of those lawless, greedy days when miners became millionaires in a matter of just a few weeks. And you can also experience firsthand some of the discomforts involved. Because the one thing they don't tell you before you board this train is that the golden age of steam had its disadvantages, namely cinders. Being a city boy born long after the days of steam, I didn't even know what a coal cinder was until I got on this train. But believe me, by the time we arrived in Silverton, I knew what a coal cinder was. It seemed like there were a half-inch of cinders on the car floors. Yes, the steam locomotive may be somewhat romantic, but it isn't very efficient. It has a habit of kicking more coal out of its stack than it burns, and a ride on this route will dampen any enthusiasm that you might have had for a return to the days of coal-fired locomotives. But in spite of the problems and in spite of the cinders, it's a ride you won't want to miss. For this is no reproduction railroad. It's the real thing, and an authentic ride back into the glorious days of the Colorado Gold Rush years on the Durango-Silverton route of the Denver Rio Grande. And now from Mesa Verde in Colorado, to complete a triangle with arches, we move back to Utah and the majestic Bryce Canyon. Stretching out before you in hues of red and gold, this colossal wedding cake-like canyon is to many people the most spectacular geological site of our nation. Here, 60 million years of geology are laid bare. It began with endless layers of sediment deposited by inland seas, followed by mountain building, plateau formation, and endless years of rain and wind and erosion. What has resulted is really not a canyon at all, but rather a fissured, eroded face of the southern Utah Plateau. John Wesley Powell led the first scientific team into the region in 1871. Earlier, a Mormon pioneer by the name of Ebenezer Bryce passed through the region briefly, leaving the canyon with two things: its name and the somewhat unromantic observation that it was a devil of a place to lose a cow. Today, the various trails will take you deep into the canyon. You can make the trip on foot, or if you prefer, you can let a horse do the hard work and make the journey in the saddle. Regardless of the method you choose, it's a trip you should make, for only by going to the bottom of Bryce Canyon can you feel the true majesty of this sculptured stone. Cathedrals of nature soar into the sky. Pinnacles of stone appear as columns of the Acropolis. It's a bewildering ruin, an enchanted landscape, standing proudly below the rim of the southern Utah Plateau. An amphitheater of stone filled with silent chessmen, patiently awaiting nature's next move. From Bryce Canyon in Utah, we now move back to where we began, and the partner to Yellowstone National Park, the Grand Tetons. Rising from the plains with all the majesty a mountain range can possess are the Grand Tetons, the most spectacular mountain range of North America and the boldest spectacle of scenery in the entire national park system. Many mountain ranges are taller, many far more massive, but none offer the infinite perspective of view, for these mountains rise directly from the plains without foothills. 11 of the mountains are considered to be major peaks. The tallest, the Grand Teton itself, rises 14,000 feet. In 1806, John Coulter left the Lewis and Clark expedition to explore the back country on his own, and he was probably the first white man to set eyes onto this range. And in 1926, John D. Rockefeller was so taken with the beauty of the range that he purchased 30,000 acres of the Jackson Hole Basin and presented them to the government as a wildlife sanctuary. Today, visitors come in ever-increasing numbers. Last year, 4 million, far more than visit Yellowstone immediately to the north. They come because of the infinite variety of activities the park offers. For here you'll find boating, swimming, horseback riding, rodeos at Jackson Hole, an endless variety of leisure time activities, including the park's most popular sport, which is mountain climbing. Al Reed, who you see here, is one of 15 guides on staff at the Exum Mountain Guides. His job is to teach you how to climb a mountain as painlessly as possible. If you're traveling in the area, you might want to give it a try. 3 days of training will actually qualify and enable you to climb the Grand, a 14,000-foot Majestic, although not terribly difficult mountain to climb. But first you must begin with the basics: rock climbing, learning how to feel the footholds in the stone, how to handle the ropes, tie the knots, and the 101 other skills that are necessary to keep you upperly mobile and not a casualty statistic. The guides on staff keep daily records of each student, and 3 days later, if you should decide to make an ascent onto the Grand, someone will review your progress to make sure that you're not about to overextend yourself. Mountain climbing primarily involves 2 people, each person helping the other person up the cliff, and this school stresses techniques of pair climbing. This school has been operating on the range even before this was a national park. Glenn Exum, for whom the school is named, made the first solo ascent on the Exum Ridge of the Grand Teton. Today, the various guides on staff here have climbed major mountains all over the world, including some well-known first ascents. This school will obviously not qualify you for Everest, but it will allow you to make simple ascents on even some rather major peaks. And if nothing else, it will get you over some of your fear of mountain climbing. It's actually not as difficult as it often looks. It's a skill that requires more stamina and common sense than anything else. And if you enjoy the clean mountain air and the thrill of a sense of accomplishment, it's an activity that you're sure to find fun. And just like the old physics principle of what goes up must come down, you must not only get yourself up the mountain, but you must get yourself back down the mountain as well. This method of walking backwards, letting the ropes out slowly, is a perfectly safe and practical method for negotiating cliffs that aren't terribly steep. But if you should decide to continue your training into a second day, well, the terrain gets a lot rougher very quickly. The 3 people that you're about to see here are in their second day of training. They're from my home city of New York, and until 48 hours ago, had probably never climbed anything more difficult than a fire escape. If you're in good physical condition, and if you catch on to outdoor activities quickly, you can make a great deal of progress here in a very short period of time. These people were planning to take a 3rd day of training and then make an ascent onto the Grand. Each year, thousands of people climb the Grand, and for each and every one of them, standing atop the 14,000-foot crest, looking into the Rocky Mountain Range, is a thrill and an experience which simply cannot be conveyed to those who have never climbed a mountain before. Mountain climbing in the Grand Tetons is the park's most popular sport. Perhaps, though, you're not ready for the strenuous activity in the ropes just yet. Well, if you would still like to have another view on these mountains, you can ride the tram at Teton Village. This 2.5-mile tram ride will take you 10,000 feet into the range, to the top of Rendezvous Peak. The tram was originally built to transport winter skiers, and during the cold winter months, thousands of people ride the tram to the top of Rendezvous Peak and have stretched out before them a near-endless snow-packed slope. During the summer months, of course, the snows melt at the lower elevations, and you can feel the changing panorama as we rise and pass the timberline. From atop the mountain, hikers head out into the range, some of their hard work already having been done with the 10,000-foot ascent. And for those less actively inclined, well, the view is breathtaking. Lovely, rolling peaks, still crowned with wisps of snow in the late August sun. Another view and another angle on these, the Grand Teton Mountains. Another of the park's impressive features is the beautiful Snake River. It meanders gently through the Jackson Hole Basin. Within the park boundaries, you can enjoy a leisurely float trip on a rubber raft. But if you're a bit more adventuresome, you might like to try a whitewater experience. To do this, you must actually leave the park itself and journey downstream a few miles to where the active rapids of the river begin. Mr. Wayne Johnson is an experienced raft runner who has been navigating the Snake River since 1976, and he's going to show us some of the magic of the whitewater experience on this narrow, twisting, winding mountain stream. So hold on, prepare to get wet, and let's ride down the Snake. And then just as quickly as the rapids began, they end, and the violent churning river once again becomes a quiet, peaceful mountain stream. Another view and another perspective on these, the Grand Teton Mountains, the most spectacular mountain range of North America and a kingpin of the National Park System. We're going to pause for a few moments and thumb back through our album of portraits and listen. For here in the national parks, the lyric, "God shed his grace on thee," is oh so very real. Americans have been graced with the most extraordinary collection of God's wonders on earth, and it is our duty and our responsibility to preserve and protect these lands as the true national treasures they are. For these parks are worth more than all the gold of Fort Knox. These parks are one of America's greatest assets as a nation. In 1956, a government report observed that the national parks were an investment in the physical, spiritual, and mental well-being of the American people. Moreover, they were an investment in something as simple and yet as basic as good citizenship, love of country. Throughout the history of America, there have been many, many good times, and there have been some bad times. And in both the good times and the bad times, these parks, in a small way, do help to remind us that yes, America, God did shed his grace on thee.
International Video Network brings you the greatest adventures in video entertainment. Award-winning documentaries from Reader's Digest, exploring the masterworks of man and nature. Travel planning videos from Fodors, revealing looks at the people, places, and cultures of the world. Rand McNally Video Expeditions, taking you to some of the most remote and dangerous places on Earth. Rand McNally Video Travelers, whirlwind tours you can enjoy from the comfort of your living room. Super Cities, celebrating the best-loved cities of the world. And Video Visits, whisking you away to exotic, romantic, and popular destinations. International Video Network, great adventures in video. See your local video retailer or call International Video Network at 1-800-669-4486, extension 850 for your free catalog, featuring more than 250 travel, documentary, and special interest videos.